All right, are we good to go?
Yes, please.
All right. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the August Board Policy Committee meeting. We're starting off with a little bit different with just kind of a brief presentation to kind of recap how the next couple board policy committees are going to go. We're kind of working our way through what we've called a task force process to do some overall review of all policies in the district for each of the alpha split areas. So if Tom wants to go to the next slide, thank you, sir. So reminder, we talked about this in the spring that we're doing a supplemental review process. So there were three main goals of this process. First was to memorialize any current practice that's not reflected in policy or regulation, or revise or adjust if there's been changes to those processes or practices as necessary, just because we had a lot of change in the district over the last few years. So making sure all of our policies are aligned to current practice. Also want to remove any process or practice that's no longer something that the district is doing. So making sure that we rescind policies that no longer apply. And then the last piece was combining when there's places where we have policies or regulations that cover either the same topic or very similar topics. If there's an opportunity to combine those into one policy or regulation as opposed to having it live in multiple places. So for those who've looked at policies for a while, the ones that have a lot of cross references where they cross reference back and forth to each other, how can we minimize the cross references if everything can just live in the same space? So the calendar over there on the right that you can see there is a breakdown of what our schedule is. So this is a pretty heavy lift for FY26. So as leaders complete their or groups complete their reviews, they go to Dr. Macklin, who's going to conduct a review with them and suggest further refinement before that moves here to the board policy committee. So we do have an internal review before it goes here to the board policy committee for final review. In addition to the goals that are listed there, the team is tasked with developing and updating any of the corresponding practice or any of the processes that also follow along with board policy. So to ensure that the requirements of the regulations and policies are being met and fulfilled. So this is both a look at policy and regulation as well as what the process and practice is within the area that that policy covers. And you can see on the calendar that we're looking to have the whole group wrapped up by that June board policy committee meeting. You want to keep going, Tom? So categories of revisions, we kind of have three big buckets that revisions fall into. A lot of what you'll see will be minor updates. So that might be fixing a cross-reference or adjusting a title or who might own a process or which department owns a process. We also might be taking a look at language to either simplify language or clarify language where it might be unclear. But the overall message, intent, structure of the policy remains mostly the same, just some minor edits. We also have policy recensions. So those might be policies that have now been combined with another policy or regulation, so we don't need it anymore. It might be something that's already DESE mandated, so it doesn't need to live in policy because it already lives in state regulation. Or it might be something that lives in state or federal law or regulation. So the policy is duplicative of what's there. So if the policy just directly covers what's in statute, then there would just be reference back to statute. And then the other big one, the ones that we'll dive deeper into as we do the task force review are an update to modern practice. So making sure that the policy and the regulation match how the district does business in 2025, 2026. So those are ones where we'll dig a little bit deeper.
Explain to me on the policy that I was on that policy extension.
Mhm.
If it is DESI mandated or state law mandated, are we going to have that somewhere where we're referring to that or what? Are we
Yeah,
just
so
I'm
it's
going
going
to
to be on
put
that's a good question, Dr. Canoe. It's going to be on a case by case basis of whether or not that lives in policy. But some of it might be covered by another policy and just be a statutory reference in that policy, but it doesn't need a standalone policy that covers it.
I
Um,
still like now maybe it's I always feel comfortable if I see cross references. Are we
mhm.
still include the cross
Yes,
reference?
cross references will still be included. So cross references to statute and regulation will still be in there. But for example, we're not covering it today, but when we get to the facilities area, we have policies about asbestos. We have a policy about hazardous materials. We have a policy about waste management, and all of those pieces could live in one overall facilities policy with those cross references to statute, as opposed to each one of them being their own individual standalone.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. That answers my question. Because I was like, outside of redundancy, like what is the
Hmm.
point of the recensions? And I get it. Like there's a
Yep.
way to consolidate it that makes more sense and easier to read, easier to access, easier to understand. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And the hope is so that way when people are looking for policy, they get everything they need on the first go, as opposed to, well, I thought I had everything, but I didn't realize that that also has some stuff over here in this other area. Yeah, and so if you want to go to the next slide, so kind of action for the committee. For minor updates, we're going to kind of group those together on the agenda and kind of handle it similar to consent agenda items where you can pull it if there's something that you've got questions about, but for on the whole, those minor tweaks, minor edits, there's not a lot of action there. Policy rescissions as well, we're going to kind of group those together with explanation on why they're being rescinded. And again, kind of handle it like the consent agenda that if you want to pull it and talk more about it, we for sure can do that, but they will be grouped together. And then updates to modern practice, those will be grouped together as well. And it'll be more like what we've done in the past with board policies and regulation reviews, where we provide kind of a brief overview of each policy regulation and kind of what the changes are and the rationale for those changes. Any questions about that?
Can we, okay, this first 4 or 5 pages on this, can we put that in Dr. Macklin's memo next time? I'd like the whole board to understand what's going on with this, because there's going to be some changes. And if you're not on this policy committee, you wouldn't have the foggiest idea what's
Yeah,
happening.
we can do that. And remember, Dr. Cuneo, sure, we can do that. Remember, also we have a first and second reading also that goes to the Board of Education. So those pieces are there. But I do think it is important, and I will piggyback on really how the task force got initiated, just to ensure, and Kevin mentioned it a couple of times just throughout the presentation, that we have to ensure that throughout a organizational alignment, that our policy is what drives our practice. And so to ensure that those pieces are there is key. But sure, Dr. Cuneo, we can do that.
Great, thank you.
All right. So our first group here is the Alpha A grouping. Chief Pendergrass, Wendy Pendergrass was the one who reviewed these policies. She was not able to be here this afternoon because of another conflict. So I'm going to kind of read a summary from Wendy about this grouping that we're looking at. So the foundations and basic commitments, or Alpha A's, contain 8 policies and 2 regulations, all of which were reviewed. The district wellness program underwent significant changes just back in June, so very recently. The prohibition against discrimination, harassment, and retaliation policy, AC, and prohibition on sexual harassment under Title IX, ACA, and prohibition against illegal discrimination, harassment, and retaliation compliance complaint procedure, ACR, all went through extensive legal review and changes within the last 24 months. Further, there were no necessary changes to the school district mission statement, AD, accountability and commitment to accomplishment, AF, data reporting, AFA. And although no changes were needed for use of tobacco products and imitation tobacco products, AH, our review did point out the need to update all of our district tobacco signage. As we've had renovations, some signage went away, so we need to bring some signage back in some places to make sure that's prominently featured. This leaves only 3 items for which we're recommending minor edits. So the first one is school district legal status, AA, changing only the Board of Education is responsible for the governance, and adding voluntary transfer program and/or voluntary inter-district choice cooperation, so VIC. Second is the prohibition on sexual harassment under Title IX ACA, is merely updating who the contact person is in the district, so just a minor tweak there. And then on 3, the school district mission AD, adds strategic plan to CSIP. So currently it just lists CSIP. We're also adding strategic plan to be listed there.
I have a question on that. Go to page 12, okay? And here was my question. On 12 of
Page
the 12, page 12 of 130. Yes, this is what happens when you print them all out. My
Which
question,
policy are you looking at, Dr. Cuneo? Is under,
ACA,
you're looking at under ACA.
page 4 of 115, page 4 of 15, ACA. My question was, can we strike? I agree that we should have director of compliance. I didn't know we put in names in policies because names will change. I thought names ended up going in procedures.
So this is the only place I believe that we still have left in policy where we are listing contact individuals. This is the MSBA recommendation to list those individuals. I believe there's a compliance reason for why we have to list names and contact information in these policies, whereas there are other policies in the district that we don't.
Yeah,
I believe it is tied back to Title
It's
IX.
just that it was inconsistent with the rest of our practices.
It is, agreed. But I believe there's a federal regulation reason in Title IX for why we have to list who those contact people are.
I'm not going to argue. I was just saying
That
it
is
was
true.
inconsistent.
It's like, yeah, federal law says you have to list because people need to be able to find it multiple ways.
Mhm.
So it would not. So you're saying it should be in the policy, not in the procedure.
Correct. And only
Okay.
because that's what's required in Title IX.
Okay.
We recognize that's inconsistent with some of our other policies.
All right. That's the only thing that I had in this.
All right, then we move to the D grouping.
I had one question on this.
Go ahead, Cindy.
I was gonna say, so I wanted to let the committee know that my team and I met over several weeks over the past couple months to review all the policies and regulations regarding fiscal management. We collaborated with other areas and departments when needed, especially if it interacted with their work, to ensure that all 46 of the documents within fiscal management were reviewed thoroughly. As a result, my team determined 13 policies and regulations required no changes. 14 policies and regulations only required minor edits, which were, as Kevin mentioned earlier, related to title changes, cross-references, additions, or suggestions, etc. 4 items are being recommended to be rescinded. That includes the energy risk management policy and regulation, and that's primarily because we haven't utilized this policy and regulation for years. And so that one's being recommended to be rescinded, as well as 2 other items, because as Kevin mentioned, as part of the recension items, these 2 policies that are being recommended for recension have to do with being state regulated or regulated and required by DESE. So those are 2 recommendations. So that left 15 policies and regulations that had significant changes that we would say that are being recommended. And so as part of the packet that you have some highlights as Tom has indicated on the screen that we're looking at now as to what was changed or why these policies or regulations have been changed and being recommended. So before going forward, I think Dr. Cuneo has some questions, but before going forward, I didn't know if you had specific questions regarding specific policies or regulations that had these significant changes that you wanted to ask, or how you wanted to proceed going forth with reviewing these 15 policies and regulations.
Were there any questions regarding these policies or regulations, specifically these 15? Were there any questions regarding these? I think Dr. Cuneo, you had one, was regarding these.
Yeah, that was DCR. And the one, it changed the percentage. I was just wondering, is that by statute or why did we change on DCR?
Is it the 15 to 20%?
Yeah, why? I was just curious. And why
So
did
that
you do that?
that is according to state statute. So
Okay,
this one was actually also reviewed by our bond underwriters and underwriting, Stiefel, our vendor and consultant
Okay.
that has to deal with the statutes and any debt. And so they did review this as well, but this does have to do with the bonded indebtedness as the state increased it to 20%.
my recommendation on that, and I know we're saying it was by state statute. Is there a reference that we could stick behind that?
We could probably do that, yeah. Yeah, we'll have to look for it. I'm not real sure, but I can look for something.
I
that
was
we
just
can
saying if we were
as a
going from 15 to,
cross-reference.
yeah, just as a cross reference. I know people don't like, I always feel comfortable with a cross reference.
No, I think that's a great suggestion.
I will look for that and get
Thank you.
those
Thank
changes.
What,
Yeah.
was there any other questions regarding the highlighted ones here?
No.
Okay.
I would like to say that when there's changes on these, I really appreciate showing the rationale for the change. Before, when we would review it, there'd be a change and then we'd talk about it. Well, I guess over the last couple of times we've had people, we have the note that explains why. I really appreciate looking at it at one sitting where I can look at it and say, that's it, and then I print it out and say, okay, that's exactly where it is.
I
That
know
makes it a lot easier.
I know President Meeks also particularly appreciates those pieces.
Man. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Our previous discussions.
Yes.
All right, Kevin.
That is the end of our list of policies for review. And that means that the next time we meet, we will be going over the B and C policies for the October meeting.
Okay.
Great.